back to our Facebook from last year. So we're 1 year since we started our weekly services here, but we're about a year and 7 months since we started praying for the Sower ministry. We started with prayer vigils in the occasion room. We were meeting on Tuesdays and Fridays, and we really didn't have any organization for anything. We were just like, oh, this Friday, guys, come, and we're going to have a prayer vigil from 8 to ... Remember those days, Deacon? And we would end literally, like, who made it to those vigils? Okay. So you guys are a new family, but we would end like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and people still wouldn't leave. And it was 2 a.m. We would flick the lights on, and people were just so joyful. It was just so beautiful, and we really took the time. It's kind of like, when you start, a new relationship, you start slow, right? So I felt like that was very important for us in starting this ministry. We didn't just want to like jump in and start, every Thursday. We wanted to take our time with Jesus through prayer, amen? Because we're lifting this up for him, and we're like, all right, we just know the date, God, and you put it together, right? Hallelujah. So let's give a shout of praise to God. So when Deacon asked me to give a talk last week today, I was really discerning through a time in my life, and it fits into the start of the Sower to what I experienced yesterday, and I'll be sharing that with all of you guys today. So I named the message today, Through It All, okay? So that was the first thing that came to me when he was like, what do you want to give your talk on? And then Hernan was like, what's the title? And I'm like, just Through It All, amen? And it took me to reflect even from our 1 year ago when we started. And sometimes we think that when when it's ministry, everything is like colorful and everything's rainbows, and we think that now because we're in our walk with God, we don't experience trials, and it's all great and rainbows and unicorns, right? But the truth is, it's not. It's really not. And that's when I'm like, through it all, I'm like coming back into my walk with God. I had no idea what I was getting into. I had no idea that the trials that I would still be experiencing, the judgments that I will still be experiencing, the hurts that I will still be experiencing, and the cross, the heaviness of that cross that I would be experiencing. But that's what it is when we say yes to God. We're saying yes to carrying that cross. Amen. And we don't do it for ourselves. We do it for everyone else. Amen. Hallelujah. So I'm going to share with you guys a little bit of my story, because I think the last time I did it was about a year ago when I shared my testimony. So a lot of you guys here don't know a lot about me. And so yesterday I did my Unbound interview. Who has done their Unbound interview? Here. Only Deacon. Okay. So what's interesting, and I'll quote her, she said at the end of our interview, my interview was 4 hours long, she was like, wow, she was like, I had no idea there was all of that behind that smile. And I'm like, well, I'm still have a lot to be thankful for, because he's still been with me through it all. Amen. And so I'll share with you guys a little bit about my story. So when I was 4 years old, my parents got divorced, and it was one of those divorces. I mean, when you're 4, you really don't know what's going on, right? You don't know. You just know that you want the two people that you love the most to be together, and you don't know why they're like falling apart. And I know that this was like a really painful time in my life, and one of the memories that I got, and it was something that I had to really release in my Unbound interview yesterday, was a memory of when my dad came to pick up like the last of his clothes, and it was me like hanging on to his legs, and literally he was dragging me out as he was walking out the door, and I was just crying and so confused as to why he was leaving. And so there was a huge sense of like, you almost feel like rejected, right? Like there was a huge sense of rejection, of abandonment, and this kind of stayed with me as I grew older. I would still see my dad every weekend. My mom would allow me to see him, but I was never allowed to go to his house or be in like private settings with him. I was only allowed to go to the park in public settings, and it was a very limited time frame that my mom would give me, and or else she would call him. If it was like 1 minute over, she would like call him right away that I had to be home. And so I didn't understand what was going on until the age of around like 15 or 16 that I found out that my dad was not only like physically, verbally, emotionally, mentally abusive towards my mom and my sister. He actually also sexually molested my sister for many years during that marriage. So when I found this out, it really filled my heart with a lot of confusion, because the father that I thought he was, seeing him every weekend and the love that I had for him, it just like became like a blur to me, and so confused and hurt and anger, like towards him, that he hurt like the people that I love the most. And so my decision was like, I don't feel like he deserves to have anything to do with my life. Like, I was even upset that my mom was still letting him be a part of my life. But she would share with me that it was something that when I was born, he was actually like things started changing within him, and he wanted to be a father to me. But before that, he was just like dealing with so many demons, like inside of him. But I still cut all ties with him, and I was like really angry. And this led me to something I discovered. I discovered a lot about myself in my Unbound interview. So I really highly, 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 highly encourage you guys really to book your interview, because I thought I was healed from so many things. And I'm like, oh yeah, like I already gave it to God. I already prayed on it. I already healed on it. But the way Unbound is, it's not only just about you, but it starts with like generational spirits and generational like curses and generational baggage that starts like from your great-grandparents to your grandparents to your parents to you to your aunts to your uncles to your cousins. So it's literally like the whole family tree. And one thing I discovered about myself is that in this abandonment with my, for my dad leaving me, I started looking, they call it like the Cinderella syndrome. It's actually a psychological term that you start looking for like father figures in men. And this led me at the age of 16, and this is something I never shared before, and this is new. The age of 16, I thought I don't think at all, I was in love at all, but I started dating someone who was 15, 16 years older than me. I was 16 and he was already in his 30s. And I remember when this was happening and he was starting to try to have a relationship with me, I almost did it because it felt safe and it felt like my dad, and in a sick way, just to tell you where my psychology was at this time. And because he took care of me, or he just would buy me food when I was in college, and all of that just felt good. And it started creating a trend in my life where I started looking for that in men, right? I started looking for security, or I started looking for that love, right? To feel comfort, or to feel just loved and accepted, because I felt so abandoned and rejected by my own dad when he left me at the age of 4. And so then that relationship ended. But then at the age of 19, I thought I found the one that met my whole list, like A through Z. When we're little girls, we tend to make a list oh, blue eyes, tall, dark, and handsome. I don't know what your list's like, but mine was like that. And when I met him, I was like, what? This looks a lot like my list. I totally and utterly fell in love with this guy, in ways that I was gave up so much of myself. And this relationship ended up being 4 years. But this guy was Muslim. And during our relationship, he would always tell me that in order for us to get married one day, I had to become Muslim. And he knew that I was really involved with my church. Like, he knew that I grew up going to El Sembrador since I was the age of 4 when my parents got divorced. That's where my mom got her strength from God. So I was that little girl playing Barbies in the church on Friday nights. But I grew up in church. I grew up with worship music and listening to worship music. And he would get mad at me if I was listening to worship music. And little by little, he started putting a lot of doubt in my head about the Catholic faith and about Jesus and about Mary and about the saints. And I didn't know how to answer those questions. I grew up going to church, but a lot of times, as Catholics, we're very comfortable. We don't try to seek more. We don't try to seek theology. We don't try to seek the truth behind the church. We just go to Sunday masses. So we're cradle Catholics, right? We're not really deep into a faith, and that was me. And I was 19, and so when I would start Googling stuff like why Jesus is not God, of course, and then I would put Muslim, at the end, Islamic, why Jesus. Of course, a lot of, resources directly from the Quran will come up that started putting a lot of doubt in my head as to why Jesus was not God. And this started, this was all between those 4 years that we were dating, but I still didn't convert. And one day I find out that he gets married. He has an arranged marriage while we're still dating and not letting me know. So I still ended up dating him for 8 months until God started putting angels in my life that started telling me what was going on, that he was really just using me at this point because he was married. And when I finally confronted him, he put all the blame on me. He said that it was my fault because I didn't convert to Islam. And so it just shows you to me that it was also a very manipulative relationship where I was, I remember I would say something to him or confront him, and he would always put it back on me that it was my fault, even if it's something that he clearly did, right? But when he put that on me, I felt like it was my fault, that I lost him because I didn't convert to Islam. So the next day, what I did was I converted to Islam. And I told him that I was willing to, give it all up. And he booked the whole it's kind of like a ritual that you do where you have to, when you're converting, you have to go in front where they have the women's section and they have the men's section, and you have to go in front of all the women and you have to proclaim this Arabic verse. And then they change your name, and you have to sign a certificate that if you die or anything, you have to be buried in a Muslim cemetery in the Muslim ways, because now you're Muslim, right? So I was going through all of this, and my family had no idea. My family had no idea. My mom here, she's still thinking that I'm going to Sunday Mass. So then a lot of lies started entering my life. I started Googling CatholicMassSundays.com to find out what the gospel was, just so that when I spoke to my mom, I could tell her what it was, when in reality I was on a Friday night service at a mosque. And so I started creating a double identity for myself and really losing who Melissa was. And people were even calling me Asiya, which was my Muslim name. But I converted, but nothing still happened. What I thought in my head, I thought I would convert and he would come back, but he was already married. So I converted, and I finally realized that that was just not the relationship with me. I had to move, change my phone number, but I was finding a lot of comfort in the Muslim community, so I still stayed practicing Islam. And in that community, I met another Muslim man. And but this time I was already Muslim. I know, guys. I see your faces. I was already Muslim. And as soon as I met him, 3 days later, I was already meeting his family. And they were already pretty much planning our marriage 3 days into meeting him, because they were very clear that in their religion, they don't date. And so I met them, and they were already talking about what the engagement will be and that the wedding will be shortly after. And so I was just going with the motions of things because I was really just mentally and emotionally lost. At this point, I had lost who I was. I had lost my own thoughts. I wasn't thinking for myself. I wasn't going to, for what felt good in me. I was just going with what I thought I wanted. I thought I wanted that wholeness of like a marriage. I was seeking this like marriage and acceptance with someone. So I actually, when his parents 3 days into meeting him told me that we had to get married soon, I was happy. I was happy because inside of me, I was like, finally someone's accepting me. Like I'm no longer like rejected, like someone, like a family's finally accepting me. Like his father like loves me. I'm like, his mom loves me. His brother loves me. So that sense of acceptance was so much bigger for me than what was actually going on in the midst of all of that. So few months go by, then I introduced him to my family. They like love him, and but they don't know that I'm Muslim. They don't know that I had to convert to be in this. I keep looking over there because that's my mom. So she knows. She's just laughing over there. You can raise your hand, Mom. So she has no idea until we start going almost into our 1 year of our relationship, because it was almost around Christmas time. And his family made it really clear that, I couldn't be around my family for Christmas. So then at this point, I had to tell my mom that I couldn't be around. And I hate even saying this now, but I would remember clearly. I was like, I can't be around that Jesus statue, because that's not, I'm like, you're just, I called it the Jesus statue, and I'm like, I don't know how you have all these statues, I can't be around it. And I'm like, and I remember my mom's reaction. It was just a reaction of, there was hurt, but yet so much love in her, because she looked at me and obviously tears were coming down her face. But she didn't say anything angry. She was just like, I'll be praying for you, with tears down her face, and I'm like, oh, okay, Mom. I'm like, that's fine. I started becoming a really hard-hearted person, but I think that was my way of putting walls around what I was actually feeling. It was easier to build these walls around my feelings to get what I thought I wanted versus, feeling what I was feeling inside, right? Because what I was feeling inside and what no one would know was that I would sometimes wake up, and I remember clearly, and this happened for weeks, I would wake up at 1, 2 in the morning, and I would just start crying. And I would just start crying and crying and crying. And then I'm like, all right, I would go back to sleep, and it would happen a lot. And I was having a lot of insomnia and restless sleep. But then I would wake up and I would put a smile on my face and put, smile that I was happy. I would say I was happy in the relationship, which I even wasn't, because it was a verbally abusive relationship. And I was saying that I was happy within that family, even though that family was really not accepting me for who I was. They were controlling over me. They were telling me how I had to do my hair, what to wear, what I could say, what not to say, what to, cook, how to, treat him, how I had to, idolize him. Even though if he, treated me bad, I still had to forgive him, and I still had to be that, perfect, soon-to-be wife to him and his family, and take care of him and his dad and his brothers, right? So in all of this, that was truly going on in my heart, but I was still going with the motions of things, right? I was still going with it all. And the time comes now, once we hit 1 year, that it was our big engagement party. And so it's not like the traditional American engagement when they get in one knee and they give you a ring. It was an engagement where they dressed me up in the fully clothes, Pakistani clothes, and they even had family members fly out from different states, and they introduced me, to the family, and it was a ceremony, so it was more of a religious engagement, and they introduced me as a Sia, soon to be Hussein, they were the Hussein family. And I remember seeing all of this that's happening around me, and I'm still putting this smile, this mask on my face, that this is what I wanted, and I kept telling myself that this is what I wanted. And we had that engagement, and I started feeling like a big part of me was dying. Like, as I was starting to cry, I realized that I was crying every night because I was really just mourning myself, my own death of who Melissa was, right? In this relationship, in this experience that I'm going through. And we started getting really serious, and he had like I said, it was very also emotional abusive. He had anger issues, and I was just accepting it because I didn't know better. I didn't know better. My father was, physically, emotionally abusive. My sister's husband was physically, emotionally abusive. And then my dad's parents were physically, emotionally abusive. So you could see where the chains of generation come, how we were talking about that, and that's why I'm encouraging you to do your Unbound interview so much, because sometimes you don't realize that things in your life are happening, and it's not just because of your decisions, but it's spirits that have come down the lines of the families and generations. So it's you don't know how to get out of it unless you renounce it and unless you have awareness of it, right? But at this point, I had no awareness that this was a spiritual battle that was going within my life. And so now there's a wedding date. There's plans, for this wedding date. It was going to be the biggest, they said the biggest Pakistani wedding that people were going to see in the community for the year. They were planning everything for me. They were picking my dress. They were picking the venue. I had pretty much no say in any of it all. And I'm just going through it all, but I feel like each step that I was taking, I felt like I was just crumbling myself more, my heart, And it wasn't until one day my nephew, Andrew, my mom bought him tickets to a Sower Metanoia a few years ago, and he calls me and he's like, "Dear Melissa," he was like, "you have to come to Sower Susa." He was like, "You have to," and I'm like, "No." I'm like, "Why? Why are you inviting me? I'm Muslim. I don't believe in that stuff. You adulterers, Catholics. I was really hardcore because I was a complete hardcore practicing Muslim. I was wearing the hijab. On Fridays, I was praying 5 times a day. I was learning how to recite the Quran and memorizing it in Arabic. His mom even had signed me up for a course with a imam, which is the highest hierarchy of the Islamic, for someone in Pakistan. So I was taking courses from someone directly in Pakistan on reciting the courses of Islam, of the Quran. And so things are going, and he invites me again, and he's like, "You would really love it." He was like, "I know you love music, and the music there is on fire." And I'm like, "Fine." I'm like, "I'll go," And I took the invitation, and I totally had to lie to my fiance at this time. I told him that I was going to dinner and the movies with my family. And, but I was really at Sower Susa, and I was really that person. I remember I was sat in the back row, and I was just like this the whole time, and I'm like, this is so annoying. But I was totally not being myself, because I'm not even that person that I'm just hard-hearted. And but it was, like I said, I was putting walls over my feelings, right, and my true emotions, and that happened. And there was a preaching, and then when it was the time to do the altar call, I was starting to feel something, stirring my heart. And there was a song, I don't know if you guys know it or heard of it, Heart of Worship. If you guys know the Heart of Worship. So there's a part in Heart of Worship where it says, I'm coming back to the heart of worship, and it's all about you. It's all about you. I'm sorry, God, for the things that I've done, but it's all about you. When they were singing the song, and I had heard it before. like before I heard it that day. So I knew the words, and I'm slowly like singing them, like during the prayer, and I'm like, no, like what am I doing, right? And the next thing I know, I'm just like there on my knees, like crying like a river there. And one of the ladies that came and prayed over me, the first thing she said, she was like, it starts with forgiveness, she said. And as soon as she said that, forgiveness, I started having all these like flashbacks, like starting from my childhood with my dad. I think that starting with my dad, I was holding a lot of like anger inside of me, and then I had flashbacks of my sister's husband, and I had a lot of anger towards him. So I had a lot of anger towards all these like male figures in my life that I felt that should have been there to protect me and take care of me, but instead were there to hurt me. And so, and that created a trend where I just allowed like men to use me and just hurt me, and I didn't have a voice, or I didn't speak up for myself or for my own identity. I just let it happen. And so I surrendered. I remember there, I'm crying, and then at the end of the night, I felt so much confusion, because I'm like, I know what happened, right? I felt that those walls that I was building around me just like came down, but what I had to face coming out of that, I had no idea how to do it, but I just did it. I remember it was just a phone call, and I just told him that I felt that I wanted to go back to my Catholic faith. And he was so mad, and he said that I shamed his family, and I shamed his family's name, and how could I, and blah, blah, blah. But I felt so much confidence and so much relief in what I just felt in those like 10 minutes at the altar, that going back again would just give me more strength and more strength to really like cut that relationship out of my life, and really go as far as like changing my phone number, and really not caring about what his family was going to say about me or think about me, and just caring about what God wanted for me in that moment. And I started seeking God, and I started attending the Sower every Friday, and I started falling in love so deeply with Jesus, and so like crazy about him in so many ways. And it took a while. It was a long journey, because I was coming with so much brokenness and so much confusion and identity, but I really felt that God, and I remember this image clearly that I had one day. You guys know Father Ed Bruno? So one of the first things that I did was actually take his spiritual classes. And I had experienced a confession with him when I was one-on-one with him, and he told me that there was an image that God was putting in my head that I really needed to like sit with. And that image was this little girl, and that was me, Melissa. And I remember seeing myself, and it was at a beach, and there was like rocks, and I was like running around and stuff, like seeking for something. And every time I would look around, it was Jesus, like behind that rock, like playing like hide and go seek with me. And at the end, like I still get like emotional. And then at the end of it, he just like grabbed my hand, and like just told me like, I am the father to the fatherless. Like, I am your father, and you have never been alone. Like I've been with you like through it all. Like through it all, like through along, like all the way. He was like I was still like there. Like even when I rejected him, even when I rejected my faith, rejected who he was, rejected the Bible. I don't know if it gets worse than that. And talking bad about him, and he still had so much like love and forgiveness and acceptance for me. And through that walk, I slowly started rediscovering again who I was, and my identity, like within God, and him telling me that I was enough always just the way I am, and I never had to change, like for anyone to feel accepted, because I was already accepted.